Okay, so we keep hearing about all these huge advances in AI, right? Especially with these like reasoning powerhouses that can tackle crazy difficult math problems and generate code like seasoned devs.
Yeah, it really is impressive.
But it kind of makes you wonder, what's the real engine behind all these big advancements?
Right, it often feels like they're holding back on the specifics.
It's like those technical reports they release. It's almost like they're deliberately keeping the most critical details hidden.
Yeah, that's definitely a frustration in the field.
Like they give you this dazzling finished product, but there's no real insight into the intricate engineering process.
Exactly. The lack of transparency, particularly around the RL techniques they're using to train these advanced LLMs, it's like a real roadblock to making more progress.
It makes it almost impossible to truly understand, let alone try to replicate their work.
And that reproducibility is key for real scientific advancement.
Absolutely. But today we have something super interesting to dig into. You sent me this really fascinating research paper called DAPO, an open source LLM reinforcement learning system at scale.
It's a really promising paper.
And this isn't just another incremental improvement, right? This is like a bold move to open up the whole hood.
They're really trying to make the development process for these powerful reasoning AI systems completely transparent.
Exactly. So they're open sourcing not just the algorithm, but the actual training code and the entire data set.
Exactly. And the results they're getting are impressive.
Oh, yeah, the results definitely speak for themselves. DAPO scored a crazy 50 points on that infamous Amy 2024 math competition.
For those not familiar, the AIM is notoriously challenging even for human students.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And to put that score in context, the previous leading system, DeepSeek R1, they scored a 47.
And DAPO managed to hit that higher score using the Q1 2.532B model, too.
Right, and what's even wilder is that they did it with only half the training steps.
That's right. That really highlights the efficiency of their system.
So we're not just getting a peek at the results, we're getting a deep dive into the nitty-gritty of their process.
And what's particularly exciting for researchers is that the paper really delves into those core algorithmic innovations that underpin this performance boost.
All right, so our mission in this deep dive is to really grasp what makes Depot tick. We want to unpack these new RL approaches for LLMs and understand why they're making such a splash in the field.
Sounds good to me.
So let's start with the core challenge. Why has scaling RL for these reasoning-focused LEMs been such a hurdle?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The paper itself actually points out that while scaling model size and allowing for longer inference times, essentially giving the models more computational power during problem solving, has been shown to really boost their abilities in math and coding, the actual training methods haven't been as transparent.
So they're giving the models more time to think, which is powered by RL, but we don't really know how they're training them to use that time effectively.
Right, it's this myth of scalable RL training. They point to OpenAI's O1 blog and DeepSeek's R1 paper as examples. Key implementation details are often missing from these technical reports.
It's like everyone knows RL is crucial, but the specifics are kind of like a secret recipe.
It's like they're saying, hey, look at these amazing results, but they don't give you the full recipe.
And the DAPO team, they actually ran into this themselves, right?
Yeah, they did. Their initial attempts using GRPO, a pretty standard RL algorithm, only got them to a score of 30 on the AME.
That's a huge difference from DeepSeek's 47.
It is. It really highlights the challenges in the field and is why they created DAPO in the first place. And other research groups have also had trouble replicating those results from DeepSeek.
It's almost like there's a piece of the puzzle missing.
It suggests that some critical training details might be missing, and that's what DAPO aims to fix by being totally open source.
Okay, so DAPO doesn't just beat the benchmark, it shows everyone how they did it.
That's right.
And at the core of this success, they have these 4 innovative techniques for long chain of thought RL.
These are the real meat of the paper, the academic contributions they're making.
And that's what we're going to focus on today. Let's start with the first one. Clip higher. What problem is this trying to solve?
So they noticed something interesting in their initial experiments with PPO and GRPO. They call it entropy collapse.
Entropy collapse. What's that?
Basically, the diversity of the model's responses started to shrink during training. Their policy's entropy, which measures randomness and exploration, it just dropped, like you can see in Figure 2B of the paper.
So it's like the model gets stuck in a rut, giving similar answers, even if there might be better, more varied solutions out there.
Exactly, so they came up with Clip Higher to combat this.
Okay, how does it work?
It tweaks the standard PPO clipping mechanism.
Remind me, what's PPO clipping again?
It's a way to prevent big, sudden changes in the policy during training that can make things unstable. It clips the important sampling ratio.
Right, right. So how does clip higher change that?
Instead of using a single clipping range, they split it into a lower clip, epsilon low, and a higher clip, epsilon high.
And that helps with the entropy issue. How so?
Well, think about it. The important sampling ratio tells you how different the new policy is from the old one.
Right.
Standard clipping can limit how much the probability of unlikely tokens can increase, Let's say you have a token with a low probability of 0.01 and another with a high probability of zero point 0.9. With standard clipping, that low probability token can only increase its probability so much.
Makes sense. So how does the higher clip change things?
By using a larger epsilon high, DAPO gives those low probability tokens more room to grow.
So they have a better chance of being explored.
Exactly. And Figure 3a actually shows how standard clipping can restrict the maximum probability of those clipped tokens. The idea is that simply copying what worked before isn't enough. You need to actively explore new options.
I like that. Don't just copy, explore.
And by raising that upper limit, Clip Higher gives the model more freedom to try new word combinations.
So more diversity in the responses.
Right, and they found that this leads to better performance. Figure 2 shows that Clip Higher gives you both higher entropy and better accuracy on the AIM benchmark.
That's clever. It's giving the model more room to breathe, to think outside the box without going completely off the rails.
Exactly, it's a balancing act.
Awesome. Let's move on to the next innovation, dynamic sampling. What challenge is this one tackling?
This one addresses what they call the gradient decreasing problem. It happens when the model gets really good at certain prompts, even scoring a perfect 100% accuracy.
So the models aced those problems. Why is that a problem? Shouldn't we be happy about that?
Well, the issue is that in GRPO, if the model gets every answer right for a prompt, the advantage becomes zero.
Meaning?
The advantage is how much better an action is compared to the average. And if there's no difference, there's no learning signal, no gradient update.
So the model stops learning from those problems it's already mastered.
Right. And as you can see in Figure 3b, as training goes on, more and more samples hit that 100% accuracy.
So it's learning less and less from each batch of training data.
Basically. So they came up with dynamic sampling to keep things moving.
What does dynamic sampling do?
It does two things, oversampling and filtering.
What do you mean?
Before each training batch, they keep sampling prompts until they get a batch where most of the model's accuracies are not exactly 0 or 1.
So they're filtering out the problems that are either too easy or too hard.
Exactly. They're focusing on the sweet spot where the model can still learn.
That's smart. But doesn't all that sampling add a lot of extra computation time?
That's a fair point. But they argue that in these RL systems, a lot of the time is actually spent generating the responses, especially for those long and complex long-tail samples.
I see.
And the results in Figure 6 actually show that dynamic sampling helps the model learn faster.
So it's worth the extra effort.
Exactly. By focusing on the right training examples, they make the learning process more efficient.
Cool. All right, next up, token level policy gradient loss. This sounds like it gets into the nitty-gritty of how the model learns from language.
It does. So the original GRPO calculates its loss at the sample level.
Meaning what exactly?
It averages the losses for each token in a response, and then averages those sample level losses across the whole batch.
And what's wrong with that?
The problem is that for longer responses, each token's contribution to the overall loss becomes tiny.
It gets diluted.
Right, so you have two issues. First, the model might miss out on learning subtle reasoning patterns in those longer, high-quality responses.
Because each individual token's signal is weaker.
Exactly. Second, it might not punish those bad parts of a long response, like repetition or gibberish, because they don't affect the overall loss much.
So it's like having a long essay with a few grammar mistakes. They kind of get lost in the overall grade.
And that can lead to the model generating longer and longer responses without necessarily getting better. Figures 4a and 4b show this.
Okay, so how does token level loss fix this?
It calculates the loss at the token level.
So each token gets its own individual score.
In a way, yes. They consider the loss for every single token across the whole batch.
And how does that help?
It gives those longer sequences more weight because they have more tokens.
So the model pays more attention to those long reasoning chains.
Right. And it means that any pattern that helps or hurts the reward gets the same attention, regardless of how long the response is.
It's a more granular approach.
Exactly. It encourages the model to generate good reasoning patterns at every step.
Much more focused. All right, on to the last innovation, overlong reward shaping. This one seems about controlling the length of the responses.
That's right. Usually in text generation, there's a length limit. If the response goes over, it gets cut off.
Makes sense. Keep things concise.
But they found that simply giving a penalty for going over that limit can mess with the learning.
Really? How so?
Well, sometimes a perfectly good reasoning process might be a bit longer just by chance.
So it gets penalized even though it's logically sound.
Right. It's like punishing a student for writing a thorough essay that's a page over the limit.
Not very fair.
And it can make the model favor shorter answers, even if they're wrong.
So how does overlong reward shaping handle this?
They have two parts. First, overlong filtering. They just ignore the loss from the parts that got cut off.
They just ignore it.
Yeah, and that actually helps a lot. Look at Figure 5. It makes the training more stable.
Huh, interesting. So it's not punishing the model for something that might have been correct.
Exactly. But they also have a more nuanced method called soft overlong punishment.
What does that do?
Instead of a harsh penalty, they have this punishment interval.
Okay.
The further you go into that interval, the stronger the penalty. It's like a gradual disincentive to being too verbose.
So it's not bad to be a little over the limit, but it's better to be more concise if you can.
That's the idea. It encourages good reasoning without being too strict.
Awesome. Now, the paper also talks about their rule-based reward model. Why did they go with that instead of training a separate reward model, which seems pretty common these days?
Reward models are great for things like RLHF, where you're learning from human preferences,
Right.
but they can be prone to reward hacking.
What's that?
The model learns to trick the reward model into giving it high scores without actually being good at the task.
So it's gaming the system.
Exactly. For math problems, though, correctness is objective.
You're either right or wrong.
Right, so they just use the final accuracy as the reward, +1 for a correct answer, -1 for an incorrect one.
Simple and straightforward.
Exactly. It avoids the whole reward hacking issue, and they cite other work in areas like theorem proving and programming where this approach has been successful.
Keeping things simple and focused, I like it. And they also mentioned transforming the data set. Why did they go through the trouble of converting answers to integers?
Math answers can come in all sorts of formats, right? Numbers, equations, all sorts of things.
Yeah, it can get messy.
And that makes it hard to automatically check if the model got it right.
So it's about making the evaluation process cleaner.
Exactly. Converting to integers whenever possible makes it easier to compare the model's answer to the correct one.
And it reduces the chances of errors in that process.
Exactly. They give a good example in the appendix about how they transformed an algebraic expression into a sum of coefficients that could be checked against an integer.
So it's all about making sure that reward signal is crystal clear for the model.
That's right.
They also talk about the broader picture of training these massive models with RL. It sounds like it's not just about the algorithms, but also about managing a complex system.
Absolutely. They emphasize that training these models is a huge systems engineering challenge.
You're not just writing code, you're managing a whole ecosystem.
Right. And monitoring is key. They talk about tracking things like the response length, the reward, the entropy, and the generation probability. Figure 7 shows these metrics.
So it's like watching the vital signs of a patient.
Exactly. It tells you if the training's going well, if the model's exploring enough, if things are stable, and if the model might be overfitting.
It's about understanding the whole process, not just the end result.
Right. And they observed this fascinating thing they call reflective behavior.
Reflective behavior. What's that?
At the beginning, the model didn't really seem to check its work or go back and revise its steps.
It just kind of went straight through.
But as the training went on, they started seeing signs that the model was thinking more critically. Table 2 has an example.
So it's like the model learned to double check its work?
In a way, yes. It suggests that RL can actually teach the model to develop better problem-solving strategies.
That's amazing. So it's not just about repeating patterns, but about actually developing new ways of thinking.
That's right.
Okay, so what's the biggest takeaway from this whole deep dive into DAPO?
I think it's that DAPO is making big strides in both improving LLM reasoning through RL and also making the whole process more accessible to everyone.
Because it's all open source.
Right. And it's not just about achieving state-of-the-art results. It's about showing everyone how they did it.
So those 4 innovations, clip higher, dynamic sampling, token level loss, and overlong reward shaping, they're not just tweaks, right? They're fundamental contributions to the field.
They are. They address specific challenges in training these LLMs for reasoning, especially those long chains of thought.
And for our listeners, understanding these innovations is key to getting a deeper understanding of this rapidly evolving field.
Absolutely. These techniques represent real progress in how we can train AI to reason better.
So if you're interested in diving deeper, check out the DAPO project page, the links in the abstract.
The code is there for anyone to explore and even build upon.
And on that note, here's a final thought. If unlocking the power of truly intelligent systems depends on understanding these complex training processes, what other secrets are out there waiting to be discovered and shared?
And what will the impact be when those insights finally come to light?
That's something to ponder.
It certainly is.